Welcome to another safety class, and today we're going to talk about Subpart F, which is fire protection and prevention. Definitely fires are one of the major hazards on construction sites, so today we're going to talk about what could be the major sources of that fire and how to protect against any fires on construction sites. So that's just an example to show here that we have some combustible fuels, which in this case is oxygen tanks. If fire reaches these tanks, which is very close here, that can cause a major explosion and a huge fire. The most frequently cited violations when it comes to fire, that was actually in the year 2004, which is pretty much the same for every year. 150 C1I, 2A fire extinguishers for every 3,000 square feet of building area not existing. 150 C14 extinguishers on each floor that are not existing. 153O liquid petroleum gas systems protection from vehicular traffic. 150A1 the non-existence of a fire protection program, and 150 C16 extinguishers within 50 feet of flammables. So these are the major violations when it relates to fire. Let's first of all identify a few things. The first definition is about what is flammable. Flammable is any material capable of being easily ignited, burning intensely, or having a rapid rate of flame spread. Flammable liquids are liquids having a flash point, which is the point of ignition, below 140 degrees Fahrenheit, and a vapor pressure not exceeding 40 pounds per square inch. So these are the flammable liquids. Another definition is a safety can, because we're going to talk about storage in safety cans. So what's a safety can? It's an approved closed container of not more than 5-gallon capacity, having a flash arresting screen, spring closing lid, and spout cover designed so it will safely relieve internal pressure when exposed to fire. Because if the pressure keeps building inside, it's going to explode. These are samples of these safety cans. And as you can see, it's labeled as a safety can, and the liquid inside is a flammable liquid. This one here is a regular gas, and so on. So they are going to be labeled on the outside as well. That's another example of a safety can. These are definitely not considered to be safety cans because they do not satisfy the previous conditions. So you cannot store flammable liquids in these. That's another example of a non-approved container for flammable liquids. In this case, actually it's covered even not with the cover but with a rag for the cap, so that's a double whammy. General requirements when it comes to fire protection: the employer must develop a fire protection program to be followed through construction and provide all equipment as required for firefighting. We're going to talk about the different kinds of equipment that are going to be used in case of building under construction or a permanent construction or whatever. Water supply, a temporary, of course, as we know, the easiest way to put out fires is using water. So a temporary or permanent water supply of sufficient volume, duration, and pressure must be made available as soon as combustible materials accumulate. Where underground water mains are to be provided, they must be installed and available as soon as practical at the very beginning of the construction project. So usually when we see immediately after the excavation, we have the infrastructure, which includes the water pipes and the water mains and sewage lines and so on and so forth. Here's an example on the installation of a water main, and as you can see, that's at the very beginning phases of construction. Water supply standpipes. In all structures where standpipes are required, they must be maintained as construction progresses in such a manner that they are always ready for fire protection use. So these are going to be dedicated for fire protection. Standpipes must be provided with a Siamese fire department connection on the outside of the structure at the street level and conspicuously marked. So this is an example of the Siamese fire department connection, which has more than one outlet, as you can see. And they have to be conspicuously marked, which means marked in a very obvious place so that no one is going to search for them or they can be hidden. So here's an example. Fire department standpipe connection. It's very clear with a sign. Fire cutoffs. Now, in case of a fire, we want to limit the spread of that fire basically until we get some external support or someone calls the fire department and things like that. So when talking about walls and doors that are going to contain that fire, fire walls and exit stairways must be given construction priority. So you're going to have fire rated drywall, for example, or fire rated masonry walls or block walls, things like that. Fire doors must be hung on openings as soon as practical, again, to isolate that fire and keep it contained within that room. Fire cutoffs must be retained in buildings undergoing alterations or demolition until operations require their removal. These include things like sprinklers, for example. If you're going to demolish a building or you're going to alter the internal use of the building, you should keep the sprinklers until the last possible moment so that in case a fire erupts, at least you're going to have the means to put it off. Portable firefighting equipment are usually extinguishers, which must be placed as follows. 1 2A extinguisher for every 3,000 square feet of floor space. Travel distance not to exceed 100 feet so that anyone from any point on that floor, anyone trying to reach that fire extinguisher are not going to travel more than 100 feet. At least one per floor and one by each stairwell. So these are the requirements for the portable extinguishers. The alternative to a 2A extinguisher is going to be a 55-gallon drum of water with 2 fire pails. So that's an alternative. Or a half-inch garden hose not longer than 100 feet, because otherwise it can get tangled and get knots, with nozzle capable of discharging 5 gallons per minute, so allowing for a quick discharge of water. The hoses must be located on racks or reels, again to prevent the puncture to the hoses or the disconnection or the tangling and knotting and so on. Another portable firefighting equipment would be a 10B extinguisher, which must be within 50 feet of 5 gallons of flammable liquid or gas. We're going to talk about the A and the B and so on in just a couple of minutes. So a 10B extinguisher, which is going to be suitable for flammable liquids or gases, has to be placed within 50 feet of any 5 gallons containers. Extinguishers must be inspected and maintained per NFPA, which is the National Fire Protection Agency. Here we have a B, actually it's a B and C, but the C has been torn from or erased from that extinguisher. So it shows what kind of fires it can resist, and it shows its capacity, when it was inspected, who inspected it, and so on and so forth. So it shows that it's ready for use. It must be conspicuously located, so again here you can clearly see it on site, and easily accessible on any floor, as we mentioned before. Now to talk about the different types of fire, we have 4 different categories or 4 different groups of fires, which are A, B, C, and D. The higher the letter, the more serious the fire and the hotter that fire. So type A is lower than B, B is lower than C, C is lower than D, D is the highest one. That classification, A is for wood, paper, or trash, which is most common but can be easily extinguished. Its burning temperature is not going to be that high. B is for flammable liquids. That's why we mentioned that you're going to have it near the containers, the 5-gallon containers, less than 50 feet. C is electrical equipment. That's going to be burning at a higher temperature. And D is combustible metals. That's going to be the highest temperature and it's going to be the longest lasting and the hardest to extinguish, basically. And as you can notice, each one of them, in addition to the letter, has a certain symbol. So the A is in a triangle, the B is in a square, the C is in a circle, and the D is in a star. The sizing of the extinguishers. Portable extinguishers are rated for the size of fire they can handle. This rating is a number from 1 to 40 for Class A fires and 1 to 640 for Class B fires. The larger the number, the larger the fire the extinguisher can put out. So the higher, the stronger that extinguisher. This extinguisher, for example, can work for 3 types, A, B, and C. So this is a multi-purpose extinguisher. This one is only for B and C. For B and C, it can also cover A, but again, it's going to be probably too expensive to use regularly for A because A can be extinguished much easier than that. How to properly use a fire extinguisher? Always use the PASS system. Remember that PASS. PASS stands for, the P is pull, the A is aim, we're talking about the extinguisher, pull the pin, aim the nozzle, squeeze, and then sweep across the base of the fire to extinguish that fire. So the first step is to pull the pin. This allows you to discharge the extinguisher. That pin is a safety measure just to so that it wouldn't discharge by accident. Aim the extinguisher at the base of the fire. Aiming at the flames will not put out the fire, but the base of the fire, that's where the ignition is. Squeeze the handle. This will release the extinguishing agent, whether it's powder, foam, or water, or whatever. And sweep from side to side with the extinguishing agent until the fire is out. So to cover across the base of that fire. During demolition or alteration, as we just mentioned, sprinklers must be retained in service as long as reasonable. New construction utilizing automatic sprinklers must follow the work and be placed in service as soon as practical. So they're basically the last out, the first in. So once you are dismantling or altering or demolishing, they stay for as long as possible, and when you are building anew, then they're installed as soon as possible. Alarm devices. An alarm system must be established by the employer that alerts employees and the fire department. The alarm system can be phone, siren, radio, air horns, etc. And the alarm system must be posted at phones and job entrances so people would know where that alarm system is so that they can notify everyone as soon as the fire erupts. Electrical wiring and equipment. When we talked about electrical work, we mentioned that fire is going to be one of the major hazards in electrical work. So electrical wiring and equipment for light, heat, and power must be installed per subpart K, which is electrical. Gas-powered equipment must point exhaust away from combustible material so that the heat from that exhaust might not cause ignition to that material. Smoking must be prohibited in work areas which may pose a fire hazard. So it's a better policy to have zero smoking tolerance on construction sites. Now look at this. He just chose the no smoking sign to start smoking underneath it. No temporary building may be erected where it would block or hinder an exit, because again, in case of a fire, you want to have a safe exit for those who are inside the building. Temporary buildings must be erected at least 10 feet from other structures, again to allow for enough space for people to get out of the building in a case of panic. It must be constructed of non-combustible materials or have a fire resistance of not less than 1 hour. So it can resist, in case it gets on fire, before collapsing, it's going to resist the spread of that fire for at least an hour. In case of open yard storage, combustibles must not be stacked more than 20 feet high. So if you have any combustible material, you're going to stack it on site in open yard storage, not higher than 20 feet. Storage area must be kept clear of weeds, trash, or any other combustibles that can ignite or can help with the ignition, so you want to avoid that. Driveways must be at least 15 feet wide and free of debris to accommodate travel of fire trucks, because you know the fire trucks are much wider than regular vehicles, so you want to allow for at least 15 feet wide access. Entire storage site must be kept free of accumulation of unnecessary combustible materials to try to limit the occurrence of fire as much as possible. No combustible material may be stored outdoors within 10 feet of a building or structure, because in case people are trying to get out of the building, they do not need to be exposed to an additional hazard of fire facing them. A portable fire extinguisher not less than 2A must be located within 100 feet. So that's in case of open yard storage. For indoor storage, all materials must be stored, handled, and piled with due regard to their fire characteristics. Non-combustible materials which may create a fire hazard must be segregated by a barrier with a fire resistance of at least 1 hour. So the minimum fire resistance in this case to enclose the fire is going to be at least 1 hour. Clearance of at least 36 inches must be maintained between stored materials and sprinkler deflectors, again to allow for the sprinklers to work properly and to spread to the required area. Maintain clearance around lights and heating units to prevent ignition of combustibles. So do not store the combustible material too close to a source of heat or a source of fire where it can cause that ignition. Adequate clearance must be maintained around fire doors, again because the fire doors are going to be used to enclose the fire. In case someone is inside, they need to get out, so you need to have easy and free access in and out of that room. For flammable and combustible liquids, only approved containers and tanks, which are portable tanks that we're talking about, are to be used. It cannot be stored at exits, stairs, or passageways, because again that defeats the purpose of an exit point in case of a fire. These by themselves are a big fire hazard, so you want to eliminate them or keep them away from the exits and the doors and the stairs. Here are, for example, flammable stored in a stairwell with no fire extinguisher in the area. That's a big violation. For the storage of these flammable and combustible liquids, no more than 25 gallons of flammable or combustible liquids may be stored in a room outside of an approved storage cabinet. So you can have more than 25 gallons, but inside the storage cabinet. No more than 60 gallons of flammable or 120 gallons of combustible liquids can be stored in any one storage cabinet. So even if you're going to have a storage cabinet to contain this combustible or flammable material, it should not contain more than 60 gallons of flammable or 120 of combustible. Now, which one is easier to ignite, the flammable or the combustible? Obviously, the flammable. That's why we have a lower limit. So here, for example, we have improper fuel storage in a job office trailer. First of all, it's close to a heat source, not proper containers, stacked improperly, and the amount is not inside a cabinet as we just mentioned. Here we have them inside a room, and we have no smoking sign, we have the fire extinguisher, we have a fire rated door, and we have all signs of warning on that door. No more than 1100 gallons may be stored in any one pile or area of combustible or flammable liquids. Piles must be separated by 5-foot clearance, again to allow for access between these piles to prevent the spread of that fire. Piles must not be closer than 20 feet to any building, again to allow for ease of a safety zone or access zone between the building and the storage area for these flammable and combustible liquids. Storage area must be guarded, must be graded to divert spills away from buildings or other exposures. So again, to allow for the natural flow of these liquids away from the building. Or surrounded by a curb or earth dike at least 12 inches high, again to prevent the spread of the leakage of that combustible or flammable liquid. Storage areas must be kept free of weeds, debris, and other combustibles. There's a missing B here, but anyway, storage areas must be kept free of weeds, debris, and other combustibles that can help with the ignition. Storage areas in buildings must have a 20B fire extinguisher, so grade B at least, outside the room but not more than 10 feet from the door, again for ease of access. Outside storage areas must have a 20B fire extinguisher not less than 25 feet or nor more than 75 feet away from the area. You don't want to keep it too close, and you don't want to keep it too far away from the area as well. When transferring liquids from one container to another, the containers must be electrically bonded to prevent any sparks that might allow for ignition. Equipment must be shut off during refueling. So if you're going to fuel any piece of equipment, whether portable or heavy piece of equipment, it must be shut off during that refueling. Flammable liquids must only be used when at least 50 feet away from open flames and other sources of ignition. So if you're going to do that refueling, again, you have to be away at least 50 feet from an open flame or other source of ignition. Service and fueling areas must have at least a 20 BC extinguisher within 75 feet of pump. So you're going to see that, for example, in gas stations. Area around tank must have proper berm or drainage to allow for the fluid to drain away from the equipment. Tank to be labeled identifying contents and hazards. No smoking or open flames in fueling areas. These are all areas where there could be some violations that can cause fires. Here, for example, we have a large fuel tank with no proper berm, no signage, or no fire extinguisher. So that's a big problem. This one here has a berm surrounding it. It has a fire extinguisher. It has the sign, danger, no smoking. So this is the proper construction of that tank. Liquefied petroleum gas or LPG, storage inside buildings is prohibited. So you cannot store it, you should not store it inside buildings because it can explode. Storage outside of buildings, it has to be done according to the following table. Here, depending on the quantity, how far from the building it should be. So if it's 500 pounds or less, it can be very close to the building. Distance in feet, no distance. 501 to 6,000 pounds, at least 10 feet. 6,001 pounds to 10,000 pounds, at least 20 feet, and over 10,000 pounds, at least 25 feet away from the building. So here, for example, we have a proper storage outside of the building with a proper clearing space. This is a temporary storage, by the way. It's not a permanent building, and it has all the warnings outside. So, and it's properly locked to prevent any inadvertent use of these tanks. For temporary heating devices, if we're working in a cold weather, we need to create a nice work environment for the employees. So we're going to provide space heaters or heating devices. So fresh air must be supplied in adequate amounts to maintain the health and safety of employees, because many of these heating devices have use gas or combustible fuels, and the fumes from these fuels may be toxic, so you want to have renewed fresh air in the area. Flammable liquid fired heaters are to be equipped with a fuel shut-off control to stop fuel in the event of flame failure. If the flame is extinguished and the fuel keeps on being emitted, then that can cause a risk of asphyxiation. When heaters are used in confined spaces, sufficient ventilation must be provided, again because of these fumes and gases. If you're going to use solid fuel salamanders, they are prohibited in buildings and on scaffolds. This is an example of a solid fuel salamander. These are not allowed inside buildings or on scaffolds. Heaters not suitable for use on wood floors must rest on suitable heat insulating material. The material must extend beyond the heater 2 feet or more in all directions to create a source of insulation between the heater and the wood floor, which is flammable by itself. When heaters are used near tarps, canvas, or similar coverings, they must be located at least 10 feet from the coverings, because all of these coverings can ignite, so you want to avoid that. Coverings must be securely fastened to prevent ignition due to wind, so that the flapping of the tarp or the canvas can get it closer than the 10 feet, so you want to secure them in place. If we look at this picture, we're going to find several violations. First of all, improper gas canisters. These are okay, but these ones are not. A heat source, and so on, and they're not properly stored. So that's a big violation here. Another violation here, we have a coverall stored on top of a gas tank. So this is flammable. We have here curtains. It seems like curtains or something like that. That probably could also be flammable. So that's not, and some other clothing here. So that's not the proper storage. Welding fires. One of the most frequent causes of construction fires is the use of welding or cutting torches. The issue is that there's going to be some residual heat even after you're done with the welding. The metal itself might still be hot. It's imperative that sparks not be allowed to fall on combustible materials. Sparks are one source of the ignition. Use fire retardant tarps or blankets when combustibles cannot be removed. And here we're going to talk about a hot work permit, which is a permit that's needed for certain kinds of work. Although not required, many companies require a hot work permit for any operation using flames or producing sparks. Requires management authorization before hot work may commence, and the permit should include inspecting and isolating combustible materials and establishing a fire watch. We're going to talk about the fire watch on the next slide. Basically, a fire watch is the use of a standby employee equipped with a fire extinguisher whose sole job is to monitor for sparks or flames. So they're not doing anything other than watching for the flame spread or for sparks. This employee should remain in the area for at least 30 minutes after hot work is complete to continue monitoring, especially, as I said, in case of welding. The metal itself is still going to be red hot even after you stop applying the welding material itself to it. So you're going to keep a watch for another 30 minutes just to make sure nothing comes in touch with that hot surface, causing it to ignite that material. For open fires, the best practice is not to allow open fires on the job. Some state and county laws prohibit burning without a permit. So again, to minimize the possibility of spreading fire. So that's basically our presentation about fire protection devices, their availability, and so on and so forth. So here are some questions that we need to know the answers to. What are the 4 steps used to using a fire extinguisher? Remember the acronym PASS, P-A-S-S. So that's the answer to the first question. P is point, and then remove the pin. A is aim. S is squeeze, and the other S is swipe across the base of the flame. What type fires does a BC extinguisher protect against? It's a BC, so it protects against B and C, and in this case it's going to be electrical and fuel. Fuel is B and electrical is C. What should you do before refueling equipment? If you're going to refuel an equipment for use on a construction site, what should you do before that? Of course, it's going to be shutting off that equipment. How many fire extinguishers are required in a building under construction? We talked about different methods of calculation. One of them is every 3,000 square feet, or at least 1 per floor, and the access should not be more than 100 feet in any direction for you to be able to access that fire extinguisher. So this is our presentation today about fire safety. I hope you have understood the material, and please stay safe. Thank you.